Just welcome everyone. You have made it to I Like That, the LGBTQ plus panel discussion of mental health providers and individuals who identify as LGBTQ plus, focus on the unique challenges faced by the LGBTQ plus community with a particular emphasis given to mental health and the ways the larger community can help create a change. My name is Avery Whittington. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a Black mental wellness mentee under Dr. Kimberly Dockery, who will be supporting the session today. I will also have the pleasure of moderating today, and so I will be helping us move along. Before we get into that, I would like to introduce our speakers for all of us. So we have Patricia, Felix, and Dr. Cordy on today. But first, let's see, I want to share some highlights from their bios. First, we have Felix. Felix is a second year math psychology master's student at the New School for Social Research in New York City. His research interests, which we'll hear more about later, include mental health disparities amongst Black LGBTQ folks, Black LGBTQ parenting, and serious mental health illnesses. Felix Gabriel earned his master's degree in history and Chinese language and culture from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. He has worked in multicultural development, early childhood education, arts administration, museum studies, radio production, national community outreach, and clinical care coordination. Felix Gabriel is a recent master graduate of Columbia University's Narrative Medicine program, where he utilized his passion for storytelling and its impact in the clinical setting. In his free time, Felix enjoys manual photography, capturing and developing 35 millimeter and 50 millimeter films, oral history, and film documentaries. Thanks for being here, Felix. Next, we have Patricia. Patricia is a mental health and wellness professional. She graduated from Penn State University with a BA in psychology and public relations and graduated with her master's in clinical social work from Rutgers University. Ms. Knowles' current focus is spreading mental health awareness within the Black community on the impacts of structural violence surrounding LGBTQ youth mental health, maternal mental health, and youth suicidology. Patricia is passionate about equity, mental health, and wellness, and ensuring youth know their importance and impact in the world, despite age and other circumstances. She is a training operations manager at the Trouble Project. Thanks for being here, Patricia. And last but not least, we have Dr. Cordy. Dr. Cordy is the Senior Advisor and National LGBTQ Liaison for AARP. Social impact advocacy has been central to the life's work of Dr. Nee Quarterly. Please excuse me if I'm mispronouncing your name. He started creating change as a 13-year-old student organizer for Oprah's Angel Network and began his career in politics as deputy to a fiercely progressive Los Angeles school board member. Over the years, Dr. Cordy has become highly sought out for his skills in policy advocacy, community affairs, and stakeholder engagement on a range of social and economic justice issues, with a focus on racial equity and LGBTQ inclusion. Also, as an organizational leadership scholar with expertise in corporate social responsibility and LGBTQ issues, Dr. Cordy enjoys facilitating learning in the public square as much as the classroom in an effort to build a more fair and just society for all. That said, as a professor in the MBA program at the University of Maryland Robert H. Smith School of Business, he was intent on challenging his students to better understand themselves as agents for change as a critical step in re-examining opportunities for organizational change. His consciousness around racial and LGBTQ justice issues is evident in his body of work, including but not limited to his academic research on how executive champions influence corporate activism on LGBTQ rights. His Harvard University LGBTQ Policy Journal article entitled Building Bridges, Not Walls, Intersectional Analysis and the Next Frontier of the Corporate Equality Movement, is considered a powerful demonstration of thought leadership among scholars and practitioners. During the 2020 election cycle, Dr. Cordy served as senior policy advisor for the Out for Biden initiative of the Biden-Harris presidential campaign. He currently serves as the board secretary of the National Foster Youth Institute, chairman of Mayor Bowser's LGBTQ Advisory Commission, chair of the AARP African American Strategic Employee Engagement Resource Group, and participates in the Google NextGen community of practice, examining issues at the intersection of racial justice, and tech policy. These examples of his activism underscore why he deservingly received the 2018 DC Black Pride Wilmore Cook Award for Outstanding Leadership Service. Congratulations, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right. So to start us off, we thought it'd be nice to just kind of frame our conversation in the question, what is intersectionality and why is that critical to this conversation about LGBTQ community support? And I'll open that up for any of our panelists.
I can start us off. Hi, everyone. As you heard from my bio, my name is Patricia. So intersectionality was originally coined by Kimberly Crenshaw as a way to help explain what Black women felt and experienced in America. It's used to describe the way people's identities can overlap and how it affects their experiences in society. It tries to explain that there are complex situations and it's not limited to just one person's identity. It is multifaceted. Every identity that they hold contributes to the interactions and the experiences that they have every day. And so it's important that we have this framework as we have this conversation, because we are in a Black mental wellness conference and we're talking about Black LGBTQ folks. And it's not just a Black issue. It's not just an LGBTQ issue. You can't separate the fact that someone is Black and LGBTQ. And so you want to keep both of those aspects in mind as you talk about the unique challenges that folks in the community might experience.
Thanks for starting that off, Patricia. And I think one of the obstacles that we're facing right now in society and in culture when it comes to intersectionality, especially when you're thinking about Black celebrities, like if you're thinking about Lil Baby, or like Dave Chappelle, when they're making comments that are really marginalizing LGBTQ people, they're not realizing a lot of times, and this is when the LGBTQ organizations are coming in and doing that work and teaching, is that it is impacting folks within their families or within their systems of society, where they're not realizing that there's that intersection of, like, when you make these statements or these assumptions about HIV, or if you're making these assumptions about trans folks in these large platforms, what is the impact that it has not only to the LGBTQ community, but what does it have in the impact locally? I think a lot of times people sometimes just air out words and don't realize the impact that it has, and that words do have violence, and it's more closely connected than people are aware of. And sometimes they want to scapegoat it to this is just a joke, or this is, but like the reason why intersectionality is so important is to have folks be mindful of that words have power, and that they're closely linked together to not just the overall community, but it might be closer to home than what a person thinks.
I want to add to what Patricia and Felix have so eloquently shared about intersectionality. And when we think of it, we should absolutely think of the brilliance of folks like Kimberly Crenshaw. We should also think about folks like Derek Bell, and we should think about even folks like Pauli Murray. And Pauli Murray, way before we were using the term intersectionality, she simply put, she described it as indivisibility. Indivisibility. There is not one point where our Blackness ends and our queerness begins, right? And so it is a frame by which we can interrogate some of the big questions of our time. It is a frame by which we can analyze any given situation and an opportunity to create change. It is a frame by which we can understand proximity to power. And I'm sure many of us would agree that the folks that are closest to the challenge, closest to the problem, dare I say, chances are they're also closest to the solution. And that's why it's critically important that in a lot of the work that I've been a part of, it hasn't been a matter of doing work simply on behalf of, it's doing work with folks at the table, with foster youth at the table, with seniors at the table, with Black folks at the table, with LGBTQ folks at the table, being able to assert their own agency. And so I just want to say a big thank you to Avery for moderating this conversation and the organizers of this Black mental wellness virtual conference. Honored to be a part of it, and honored to hopefully share some insights that the folks that attending, can run with. The folks attending just might re-examine some of their underlying assumptions about who we are as Black people, who we are as queer people, and hopefully these insights will help to make the world a better place.
Yes, that's a great segue to our next question, because like we're not a community that exists in insular, just as if the parts of our identity can't exist in isolation. And so part of what we have to talk about is, of course, the interactions between queer folks and our community members who may not share that identity. And so next, I want to bring us to a discussion on the idea of coming out versus inviting in. What do you all think about that distinction and kind of that as a different way to reframe that conversation?
I mean, I'll go ahead and start off on this question. When I think about when I discovered that I was gay, and I consider myself a late bloomer, I didn't discover I was gay until the latter part of college. However, I always knew that I was different. I'm the youngest of 5 boys. I have probably the most uncommon first name of all my siblings. David, James, John, Joseph, and Nicordelai, right? And so, of course, I grew up feeling different in that way. My father was born and raised in Ghana. My mom grew up near the height of the civil rights movement in Florida. They met in college in Texas and had me in California. And so lots of different experiences there, exposed to different worldviews there. And so I felt different in that way. And so I've always felt different. I just didn't always attribute that. Actually, I've never attributed that, only to my sexual orientation. And so, I didn't have a coming out party. And I never really thought of it as coming out, as much as I did think about it as inviting in belatedly, right? And it's something that we do not just one time, but we do this in sometimes grand ways and sometimes subtle ways, more days than not. That's the reality about, quite frankly, being your authentic self. No matter what your sexual orientation or gender identity, everyone comes to terms in one way or another with who you really are, who your authentic self is. And so I want to credit David Johns from the National Black Justice Coalition, one of our fellow advocates and organizers in the movement, for doing his part to raise consciousness around inviting in a concept that seems to feel a bit more, seems to fit a little bit better for some of us than the concept of coming out.
Thank you so much, Dr. Corsi, for starting us off. I want to touch on what Felix mentioned when we were talking about intersectionality. Just words have power. And so when I think about inviting in versus coming out, as someone who chooses to share aspects of themselves, it could be anything, right? But when someone chooses to share their identity, sexual orientation, any part of themselves, they have the power to invite me in, right? Like, it's giving them back that autonomy. When we phrase it in terms of coming out, I read a really great article written by Rodney S. Williams Sr. for Medium, in which he talked about, like, inviting in is person-centered, whereas coming out is other-centered. And when we use the words coming out, it's giving folks the ability to reject who this person is. And, you know, as I don't deserve that power, that's not for me to do. This is who someone is. I want to be invited in. When someone shares that part of me, it just allows me to feel like, oh, this is someone who feels like I can be a part of their community. I'm a safe space for them, rather than them trying to gauge what my response or my reaction could be.
Thank you, Patricia. I think also like going into my personal narrative, and as a first generation immigrant, and my parents coming from the Caribbean, and understanding who am I as a Black cisgender queer man, and like how is that expressed and how is that invited in. And I could just pinpoint moments in time where I think there is this expectation sometimes, at least for me when I was growing up in America, in society in America, where, oh, I guess this has to be this huge event. And it was so scary for me because I was like, okay, I guess I'm gonna, and it wasn't like that at all. And I still grapple with this even to this day sometimes, where my mom still talks to my partner. It's like, oh, how's your friend? But that's just, and I having to come to terms with like, all right, that's just how she's gonna frame it. Like, but that doesn't mean she's not gonna do a double cheek kiss, right? 1, 2, and be like, how are you? How's your day? And inviting him in. Like sometimes inviting in is different for every person or every community, especially every culture. And I think that was something as a Black queer person that I had to figure out. I was like, oh wait, like I'm not gonna control how you invite me in. At least you're inviting me in. Because I know a lot of stories anecdotally and just through the research that that's not the case, and the mental harm that can cause, that is causing young folks, young Black queer folks.
Thank you for sharing all your. Did either of you all want to jump in and go as well? Like I'd love for this to be more of like a conversation and like a your turn, your turn, your turn. So please, if anyone else wants to go.
Thanks, Avery. I definitely want to jump in there and just say, as we're talking about the concept of coming out versus being invited in, is that, as Felix mentioned, it is a unique journey for everyone, and it's not something that you have to decide to do, right? And that's what I think gives so much power to the concept of inviting in, is, as Dr. Corti said, folks who come out have to come out every single day. It's not a singular action. And inviting in, you get to choose the people who you want to have in your inner circle. You get to choose the people who are going to be creating that safe space to you. And so again, just to emphasize, it's not something that you have to do. If there are folks in the audience who are thinking about it, it looks very different for folks. And it should be on your own time, on your own terms.
Yeah. And one thing that we can all do is, create safe spaces, create brave spaces where that's a real choice for people. Where they feel like, oh my gosh, I couldn't possibly come out, or I couldn't possibly invite, folks in, for fear of rejection, for fear of violence, for fear of, everything in between. And so for all the folks that are logged in right now, and the folks that will watch snippets of this on social, if not watch it in full on some other platform, one solid thing that we can all do is do what we can from where we are with what we have. And that is an organizing principle that I've adopted and used for years. And it's what encourages me wherever I'm at to create an environment where folks feel comfortable opening up, feel comfortable being themselves, feel comfortable in their own skin. And I think, if we all do our part to do a little bit more of that, I think we might find the basis of the beginning of some transformation in our lives and in our communities.
Yeah, that actually brings me back to what Felix mentioned, talking about the baby's comments. We can even add Boozy, Dave Chappelle, is folks are scoping you out to see if you are a safe space every single day. So the way that you respond and you react to these cultural moments that are happening the things that you say, the things that you retweet, you post on social media, there's someone who's clocking that, and there's someone who's like, I could never be myself with this person. I will never invite them in, even though maybe you think you are an ally, right? You've deemed yourself as an ally. There are things that you are showcasing, there are actions that you are doing that is showing to someone else that you're not. And so exactly like Dr. Corti said, is we can do better to provide safe spaces for folks. That way they can invite us in more and more, that they know that we are someone that they can trust with this.
And just one more point. One thing that I've also noticed about the future generation, because if y'all not doing it, the younger folks are. I was walking around with my friend's son, and we were out and about doing a little history tour. And he's like, "Hi, my name is Julian, and my pronouns are he, him, his. What are your pronouns?" 7, 8. So like it's one of those things where history is now, and it will surpass us if we don't see, like, if we don't come to the changes. And so it's basically what Patricia's saying. It's like people will be clocking you, and they could be 7 years old, and they'll be like, wait, what's your pronouns? Like, is this a safe space for so and so? Those conversations are happening in school, and we're seeing in society that conversations of gender, sexuality, and critical race theory are being combated against. And so that's happening as we speak.
And I just want to call out, as you mentioned, pronouns, that pronouns are not, when someone shares their pronouns, they are not inviting you in or coming out. Do not take that to be who they are, their identity, anything like that. It's just their pronouns. Take them for who they are, respect their pronouns, that's it.
Yes, that's such a good point. Okay, I'm going to pivot us with this next question. A lot of LGBTQ plus individuals experience religious trauma, and define that as you will. So yeah, what is religious trauma, and how can we support our loved ones or clients going through that? Kind of talk more about intersections.
I can start. To be honest, that's a tough one. Because it goes both ways, right? So like with religion, it can actually be a protective barrier for someone who is in need. And that's not just seen anecdotally, but that's seen in the research also. Like there, it can be a grounding, and there are, in my experience, there's been churches that accept who I am. However, at the tail end of that, also is that there has been a lot of internalized hate because of my religion, and because of that internalized hate, it's been been very conditioned for me, and it stems from the church. And there's a reason why in my mind I came out as a late bloomer, and that's like after college, because I was supposed to be a certain presenting masculine man, and I was supposed to speak a certain way, act a certain way, and I had to pray the gay away, as they say. And so, like, that really did condition me to hurt myself, mentally, spiritually, for a very long time. And at the same time, I think in finding myself in who I was able to, it's almost like I was able to use who I was and how to accept myself as a Black queer man, and then be like, but I still have this place in religion that grounds me too. So it's almost like it can't be like a either or, but like a yes and.
Yeah, I mean, as Black folks, we value community. That is centered to who we are. And a lot of folks find comfort in their communities, and that could be religious, that could be their chosen families. And so, exactly like Felix said, it's not one or the other. There are people who have been hurt by the religious communities that they grew up in. They've heard certain rhetorics that make them feel like they can't be themselves. And then there are folks who are like, I can be myself because I have this community. There are affirming churches. There are people who seek out the spaces where they still value the Bible or whatever the book that they follow, and they know that they can be who they are. They can come with their partners, and they're not going to be looked, or there's not going to be any discussion or during the sermon that tells them that they can't be who they are. So I think it depends on the person. It's not one size fit all for everyone. It's just, again, part of the unique experiences of folks within the community.
Yeah, I really just want to take a moment out to give a shout out to the organizers of Pride in the Pews, Araya Baker, who some of us may know. This question is his area of expertise, so I'm sure if you find him on social and get in his DMs, I'm sure he could wax eloquently, about religious trauma and overcoming religious trauma and providing tips, tools, and resources for folks to do that. But one resource that I remember him mentioning often was the work of Pride in the Pews, which is a campaign to really sort of elevate queer voices of faith. Yes, there are affirming churches out there. I know oftentimes in the work that we do, sometimes, Black churches are made out to be the boogeyman. Sometimes Black churches are made out, to be inherently homophobic. And I think that is problematic. Certainly there are all churches, that struggle with affirming LGBTQ people. And so I don't think Black churches sort of have a monopoly on that. So I would encourage folks to seek out not just affirming churches, but affirming believers, right? And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about coming out versus inviting in. I'm sure there's some churches out there that may host a coming out party for someone, but I'm sure there are a great many more churches where there are believers there, where you can feel safe to, invite them in, and they might feel safe enough to invite you in. And so I'd encourage people to seek that out and also check out the work of Pride in the Pews. And, there's so many more LGBTQ organizations that are doing work in faith communities across the country and around the world today, certainly than, I was aware of a decade ago or 20 years ago. And so I would encourage folks to seek that out. I know in the meantime, we all have to do our part, whether we're in houses of worship or not. We all have to do our part to create an environment of safety as opposed to succumbing to creating environments of fear.
Yeah, I appreciate you all kind of wading into this sort of sticky topic with me. Something that I'm hearing in this answer and also in all the other ones is sort of how do we make the most space possible for people to bring the most of themselves possible. And so kind of the flip side of that and kind of the opposing force that comes to mind is around like the idea of conversion therapy. I know, Felix, you had some points that you wanted to raise around this. So the question is, how would you address family members who are convinced that conversion or reparative therapy could fix their queer child or their queer family member?
Yeah, and this continues into the sticky topic because intent versus impact. Like the intention is like, I love you, I want to help you, based on this archaic notion of what they were taught, right? But the impact is more trauma. And some of my research that I've been looking at is kind of getting into the numbers. Like there's only 21 states in the United States that have fully banned conversion therapy. And this is from the Movement Project, Movement Advancement Project, great organization that really looks at the United States when it comes to topics, one of them being conversion therapy. And the impact of that in some of the research that I've been doing is that those states that haven't that have fully banned conversion therapy, there is less internalized homophobia amongst Black same gender loving men. And so what does that mean when there is actual structural systems that are actually endangering Black LGBTQ folks from trying to ascribe to something that is not their authentic self? And so when talking to parents or to family members, it's what is the reason, or what is the purpose of it, and like kind of asking those questions, gauging those questions, and from there on out seeing that there may be something there of care and compassion, but they might not know that from that care and compassion that there's actually inflicting more harm. And depending on the people, sometimes I go with numbers, just like I did right now, or sometimes it's just seeing the impact of like how might this impact your child or your family member in doing this impact. Or for others it's just like what is your story? What is the narrative? Where do you get this information from? Because the danger about conversion therapy is that it can be practiced, like it has been seen to be practiced by mental health practitioners. Like, so that is a danger in itself, but also a lot of times it also is religious leaders. So like it might be this trusted source of like, you trust this person and they're telling you that they through this program that will help, and that this stress that this is happening in your life might this program, conversion therapy, might help, but in turn that's going to impact more of your child. And so it's definitely a conversation. There was recently a documentary by Ryan Murphy that just came out on Netflix. It's called Pray Away, and they talk a little bit more about this conversion therapy if you want to look more into it and the impacts it has on children and on teens. It is more focused on white folks, and that's kind of why in my research I'm doing a lot more on the Black community to see where conversion therapy lies in that.
Can we also connect the dots to the fact that, representation matters? And I'm thinking about Assemblymember Evan Lowe in my home state of California, who was a national leader in banning gay conversion therapy in California by reclassifying it as consumer fraud, because it's not based in science. Since he did that, last I checked, there were 14 other states, that have introduced legislation very similar to the legislation that Assemblymember Evan Lowe in California had introduced. In California, gay conversion therapy, his bill passed. It is classified as consumer fraud. So that's an example of how and why having LGBTQ leaders in elected and appointed office can make a difference. I would also add that, there is nothing scientific about conversion therapy now, and there certainly was nothing scientific about conversion therapy way back when. There's another documentary I would encourage people to check out. It's called Cured. AARP is really proud to have partnered with the filmmakers of Cured. We sponsored the national broadcast of Cured on PBS on National Coming Out Day, October 11th. And it's still available on the PBS app, the PBS platform. And so I think through the end of this month. And so I would encourage the folks that are listening to this to check out that documentary and really celebrate the organizers and the trailblazers that fought the American Psychiatric Association to really, get homosexuality out of the DSM manual as a mental disorder. I mean, imagine that. Once upon a time, homosexuality was classified as a mental disorder. That led to a lot of pain and a lot of trauma and a lot of violence towards LGBTQ people for a long time. A lot of stigma, might I add, stigma that we still live with today. And so, it's important that we understand that the challenges we're dealing with today didn't just start today. It started a long time ago, and we've got to understand the genesis of them if we're going to rid them from our lives and our communities. And so check out the Cured documentary on the PBS app. It tugs at your heartstrings, but it's also inspiring to see what's possible when we get organized to make change.
Yeah, thank you both so much for starting out the conversation with that. I wanna go back to the language that we've used in the question as well, in terms of this idea that conversion therapy can fix their child. I'm going to be blunt with my answer and be like, no, it can't. Also, there's nothing to fix. Support is so necessary for young folks when they are discovering themselves and inviting you in and telling you who they are. And as Felix mentioned, the impacts, right? Some of these impacts could be increased suicidality, depression, substance abuse. And it's been warned that family members who put their children through conversion therapy, the child will come out feeling like their family is rejecting them. It's not seen as a good thing, right? And then you think about what's going on through their young mind as they go through this conversion therapy, they come out and nothing has changed. And either they now have to go through this out-of-body experience where they have to prove to themselves and everyone else that everything is fine and deny this part of themselves, which can lead, again, like I said, to depression, or they have to face this feeling of possibly disappointing their loved ones, again going back to the intent that the person might have had. And so it's to me, it's like not necessarily sticky, it's just plain harmful, it's dangerous. And I love seeing all the work being done across the country to get it outlawed, and there's still a lot of work to do.
And to Miss Patricia's point about there being a lot of work to do, couldn't agree with you more. And I'm looking at one of the comments in the chat. I think one of the challenges sometimes with LGBTQ issues is sometimes we see a messenger and a message that we can sort of relate to, but I don't think we see Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color. I don't see us highly visible, as visible as we need to be on these issues, right? And so, if you Google gay conversion therapy based upon, the images that would come up and the video that comes up, you would think it's an issue that doesn't really affect Black folks, but it does affect Black folks, and you may not see us, in a popular documentary, or you may not see us, as often as you should on the news around the issue, but it affects us. And so I think sometimes one of the challenges that we have as organizers, as LGBTQ organizers, as organizers for civil and human rights, is, well, who's telling the story? And chances are, if we're not comfortable sharing our story in the public square, well, the person that is tells it, and that issue sort of gets thought of and affiliated with their lived experience. And our lived experience with the issue becomes foreign. It becomes marginalized, right? And so, I just want to encourage us to think about whether we're talking about, conversion therapy, or, we're talking about a whole wide range of issues that impact LGBTQ folks. Back to the genesis of this conversation, intersectionality, talking about our indivisibility. At no point does our Blackness end and our queerness begins, or, gender identity, as male or female or gender nonconforming. It's all part of the same gumbo.
Yeah, to that point, I just want to further emphasize is, just as we know American history, like the history of this country, has been whitewashed, LGBTQ history has been whitewashed as well. I mean, there are a lot of pioneers behind movements they were Black and they've been erased from history. You think about the Stonewall riots, Marsha P. Johnson, all of that. And so it has continued on even today as we are seeing some advancements. But exactly like Dr. Forchi said, who's telling the story, but also who's centered at the story. Who do we see, being shown or reaping the benefits, quote unquote, of these changes? There's not enough of Black LGBTQ folks showing that this is impacting them, this is how it's affecting them, and this is how change can happen.
Yeah. And just to add on that's kind of the conversations I have with folks now. Myself, the fear of, okay, like if there is a sharing of the story, it can get co-opted. And so like I think about ballroom, for example. And that's a very honest thing where it's in New York City. Like, I'm from New York, I'm from the Bronx. Like, that's just something that was always there. But now that it's becoming so mainstream, who owns that? And so I think a lot of the conversations about like being Black and queer and being seen, there's this beauty of being seen. There's also this like this tangent of violence too, right? Who takes away the story? Who owns the story? And who takes it to Hollywood, or who takes it and then it premieres to something else? And who is the audience? And so I constantly ask, like, for who is this for? Who is this for? And so that's a really good point, Patricia. Thank you.
I see in the chat someone had asked, how can Christians best support the LGBTQ community? Even just as I read the question, I'm thinking, well, number one, Christians are a part of the LGBTQ community, and so are other people with faith, right? And so, how can we support one another? Maybe another way to sort of, think about that question. How can we support each other? Toxic, just as toxic masculinity is a thing, toxic femininity is also a thing, right? And so, we can't address these things, if we can't keep it real with each other, and we can't be authentic with each other, and or if we fear violence or being stigmatized by one another. And so I think one of the best things we can do is to create a loving, inviting, warm environment, be consistent in doing that. And I think we'd all be surprised at what growth may spring from that.
Yes, I love that. I hate to have to start wrapping up our conversation, but I want to throw out one more prompt for us that was initially written for Patricia, so I want to open it up to you first. But I think it'd be a good one to end this off on. So Patricia, on the Trevor Project blog, you stated that you hope the world learns the beauty of a collectivist framework. Can you explain what a collectivist framework is and what you imagine the world would look like with it? And again, I also want to throw that out to you, Felix and Dr. Cardi.
Great, thank you. I'll answer it quickly so that the other panelists can join in. So, when I wrote this blog post, it was February 2021, and there had been so much coverage, and I saw so many people talking about how they weren't going to wear masks because it wasn't their responsibility to care about other people. And that's really where that thought came from too. It's just like, I can't, we have the slogans going around of wear a mask to protect each other or one another. And then it slowly shifted to wear a mask to at least protect yourself, because that was leaning into the individualistic society that we have. And so with collectivism and collectivistic framework, it's just the emphasis and the centering of the goals and the needs of the community and the group over the individual. And so to bring it back to this conversation of LGBTQ folks in general, is just it's not about it's not about my solo advancement as Patricia in this world, right? As a Black woman, I have to be able to bring everyone with me. I need to be able to join the fights and have the fights that represent me, my brothers, my sisters, everyone, my Black LGBTQ folks. It can't be cheering on for a policy change that only affects me, right? Because there are so many other people that are going to be impacted by that. And so I just want us to care more about each other. I want us to care more about the unique lived experiences that we have, and fight for one another. Again, to bring it back to popular culture, the rhetoric around Lil Nas X and Boozy and Dave Chappelle and The Baby, no one should stand for that, in my opinion, right? Like, because there are Black people who are also in the LGBTQ community. You can't single it out. And so for me, that what that world would look like is just us all protecting one another.
I just want to snap. So this is one of the biggest things and my biggest crux in psychology. It's very individualistic, and I think it just is a mirroring of the world or of Western society, to be very specific. And what Patricia is really like teasing is a lot of Afrocentric psychology, which is something that I really hold near and dear now, about like what is the collectivist thought? What is like how is Patricia's actions not only impacting her, for example, but like not only the family systems, but also the community. And I think we have to start moving into that mind frame of like, okay, how do we invite people that are harming our community and not go into this, oh, we got to cancel each other out, because for us to continue to cancel each other out, we are still perpetuating that individualistic mindset that has brought us back. And that is so much harder to do. And I have to even say that to myself, like being in a collectivist framework, it's easy to say it, but it's so much harder to practice, because that means you have to forgive and you have to invite in. It's kind of going back into this inviting in, like, I know you've done me harm and my community harm, but what I'm going to do, instead of isolate you, which is expected of me by this capitalistic, white, individualistic society, I'm going to teach you to invite you in so that we can learn together. Because whatever harm you've done to me, I know someone harmed you, but I'm not gonna like let that be an excuse. I'm gonna keep you accountable on that, but I'm gonna invite you in still. And that takes a lot of like internal growth. So it's not this easy, like it's a collectivist mindset. It's a very powerful tool to bring in. And I'm gonna like shout out Afrocentric psychology because of that. Like that is, and that's a curriculum that we're never taught. Linda James Myers, like all these people before us that have been teaching these essential rules, or not even rules, but just like ways of living. So thank you so much for bringing out this discussion.
I'll be super quick. When it comes to cancel culture, call me crazy. I'm not really about canceling folks. I enjoy, having critical conversations. I enjoy, leaning into sort of critical consciousness and working through things. I want to encourage people to do that and do more of that. It's hard work, but it's important work. I know restorative justice isn't easy. Practicing restorative justice isn't easy, but I think there's no time like the present to do that. Rugged individualism, I think this is a good time to examine that, interrogate that, and ask ourselves how well that's serving us, how well it's serving our communities, and to practice the kind of radical imagination of folks like Pauli Murray, and to begin to think and dream and act anew.
Oh, so beautiful. We have just about a minute left together. Do any of you all have any kind of like final words of wisdom or anything that you would like to share for the greater good of our audience?
I just want to jump in and emphasize again, please respect people's pronouns. It is an act of violence when you actively choose not to. It is, the same way that you respect someone's name, respect their pronouns. It is literally life-saving when you do.
You have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. That's what I will.
And I'll end on this. It is a prayer that I pray often. It has been a source of it's helped to ground me over the years. It grounds me every day. It's a serenity prayer. God grant me the ability to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That is my prayer for all of us as we continue to navigate these challenging times, but also times that are filled with so much potential and so much opportunity.
Thank you. And thank you all for showing up and sharing your wisdom and your experiences with us. And thank you all audience members for participating in our discussion, for sharing space with us. Thanks.
Thank you.
This was great.
You.
Wonderful moderator.